Imagine a world where fear is currency, where unseen forces decide who lives and who dies, and where power is seized not through elections but through bloodshed and betrayal. Crime syndicates didn't just operate in the shadows, they reshaped entire nations, spreading terror and chaos. Stay with us as we uncover how these ruthless empires rose, ruled, and left scars on history that still bleed today. Crime syndicates aren't just groups of criminals, they're global empires built on fear, violence, and greed. From assassinations to controlling governments, they have altered the course of history in chilling ways. These stories will take you into a world where trust is deadly, loyalty is bought in blood, and fear is the ultimate weapon. Organized crime didn't just appear, it was born in chaos. From the smuggling routes of collapsing empires to the lawless streets of industrial cities, syndicates emerged where the rule of law broke down. Imagine a world where lawlessness ruled, and survival meant aligning yourself with the most dangerous people imaginable. In Sicily, the mafia was born out of desperation and turned into a monster. What started as protectors of the powerless became an organization of terror, controlling every aspect of life on the island. By the late 19th century, the mafia wasn't just feared, it was untouchable. Imagine living in a place where every decision, your job, your family's safety, even the price of bread, was controlled by an invisible hand. The mafia didn't just punish its enemies, it made examples of them, leaving a trail of fear and silence in its wake. For the people of Sicily, disobedience wasn't just risky, it was a death sentence. When Italian immigrants brought the mafia to America, they found fertile ground in the chaos of prohibition. Figures like Al Capone and Lucky Luciano didn't just run rackets, they built empires, turning cities into battlegrounds and fear into profit. Imagine living in a city where a single word from these men could mean your end. Al Capone wasn't just a gangster, he was a warlord who ruled Chicago with brutality. The infamous St. Valentine's Day massacre showed the world his capacity for terror. Imagine walking through your city, knowing any moment could erupt into bloodshed. For Capone, life was cheap, and loyalty was deadly. Across the world in Japan, the Yakuza rose as a terrifying mix of tradition and crime. Rooted in samurai culture, they promised honor but delivered brutality. Their intricate tattoos and missing fingers became symbols of their power and the fear they inspired. Yakuza loyalty came at a price. Betray them, and you'd lose a finger, or worse. For centuries, they built their empire on gambling, extortion, and trafficking, weaving themselves into the fabric of Japan's economy. Imagine knowing that even your government might be under their control. With the world becoming more connected, so did crime syndicates. Drugs, weapons, and human trafficking became global enterprises, leaving no corner of the world untouched. The scale of their operations wasn't just terrifying, it was unstoppable. Pablo Escobar wasn't just a drug lord, he was a dictator who ruled through fear. His Medellin cartel turned Colombia into a war zone, leaving bodies in the streets and fear in every home. Imagine living in a city where every step you took could be your last. Escobar's brutality knew no bounds. He ordered bombings, assassinations, and massacres without hesitation. Entire families were wiped out as he tightened his grip on Colombia. Imagine seeing your city torn apart by violence, knowing even the police were too afraid to stop him. Escobar's death in 1993 didn't end the terror. His cartel left a legacy of fear and violence that still haunts Colombia. The Medellin cartel showed the world how far crime syndicates could go, and how deeply they could scar a nation. In the digital age, crime syndicates became more dangerous than ever. From hacking to cryptocurrency, they adapted to a new battlefield, making them harder to track and more terrifying to confront. Imagine a world where your money, identity, or even your government could be under their control. When the Soviet Union collapsed, chaos created the perfect breeding ground for the Russian mafia. They didn't just control businesses, they infiltrated governments, smuggled weapons, and manipulated entire economies. Their power wasn't just local, it was global. The Russian mafia blurred the line between crime and government. With bribes, blackmail, and violence, they turned politicians into puppets. Imagine living in a world where even your leaders are controlled by invisible hands. The Triads, one of the oldest crime syndicates in the world, evolved from resistance groups into global empires of terror. For centuries, they ruled the opium trade and expanded into human trafficking and counterfeiting, spreading their shadow across Asia. Triad members swear loyalty in blood and enforce obedience through brutal violence. Their reach extends across borders, making them one of the most feared syndicates in the world. Imagine knowing that betrayal wasn't just punished, it was erased. Fear is the currency of crime syndicates. From public executions to silent threats, they built empires on the backs of terrified communities. Imagine a world where silence wasn't just golden, it was your only protection. In Mexico, the rise of cartel assassins, known as sicarios, turned towns into war zones. These hitmen didn't just kill, they sent messages. Bodies were left hanging from bridges, and massacres were broadcast as warnings. Imagine living in a place where terror wasn't the exception, it was the rule. The cartel wars turned Mexico into a battlefield where even children weren't safe from the violence. Towns emptied as families fled the bloodshed, leaving behind ghost towns filled with fear. The cost of their terror is written in blood. Then Drangheta, Italy's most secretive crime syndicate, became one of the richest in the world, controlling Europe's cocaine trade. Their silence made them nearly impossible to infiltrate, and all the more terrifying. Then Drangheta thrives in the shadows, avoiding the flashy violence of other syndicates. Their power is silent but devastating, showing how crime can thrive without a single gunshot. Crime syndicates don't just spread fear, they reshape societies. Entire industries, governments, and economies bend to their will. Imagine a world where every dollar you spend could fuel terror. When crime syndicates infiltrate governments, everyone suffers. Public funds disappear, justice is silenced, and the vulnerable are left defenseless. Their power comes at a cost no society can afford. In Africa, syndicates fuel wars by smuggling blood diamonds, leaving a trail of death and destruction. These stones weren't just valuable, they were cursed by the suffering of those forced to mine them. Imagine being forced to dig for diamonds under threat of death, knowing your work funds weapons that destroy your own community. The human cost of blood diamonds is a chilling reminder of greed's darkest side. Women aren't just victims, they play critical roles in crime syndicates, from running empires to orchestrating assassinations. Figures like Griselda Blanco, the Black Widow, prove that terror knows no gender. Governments have waged wars against crime syndicates for decades, but for every victory, a new threat emerges. The fight is relentless, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Today's syndicates are more powerful than ever, operating in a world where technology is their weapon. Their influence is everywhere, and their terror is closer than we think. Behind every syndicate are survivors, people who escaped, fought back, or exposed the truth. Their courage reminds us that even in the darkest corners, light can shine. These stories aren't just history, they're warnings. Crime syndicates rise where justice fails, and their terror spreads when good people stay silent. As crime evolves, so must we. Awareness, vigilance, and action are our best weapons against the terror they bring. We must remember these stories not just for their horror, but for the lessons they teach. Crime syndicates thrive in silence, but knowledge is power. From the Sicilian mafia to modern cartels, these stories reveal the terrifying power of crime syndicates. Which one shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of terror, resilience, and history's darkest chapters. Stay safe and stay informed.